Hello everyone, so I'm Kate from Roe and Louise Jewelry, and today we're going to be making some faux ocean stone. So here's what we're going to need for today. We're going to need clay tissue blades, some white clay, some Sculpey Primo translucent clay, any clay roller that you have. I also have like my machine, which I have the Atlas 150 that I'll be using. And then I'm going to be using these colors to dye the clay today. So I have terracotta, turquoise, white, and brown chestnut. So that's everything you need for today. And yeah, let's get started. So we're going to start by cutting open our Sculpey translucent. I'm going to use this whole block today. So you're just going to divide it in four, kind of just following the lines like that. So we have 4 chunks like that. Then I'm gonna go and cut all of these in half. That just makes it easier to put through the clay roller, which is the next step. So I'm gonna go and slice them again, but keep them in this grouping of 4 because I'm only doing 4 different color varieties for this particular slab today. I'm going to be rolling them through my Atlas 150 clay roller at 0. I just find that's the easiest point to start. We don't need the clay to be super conditioned at this point. We just kind of want to roll them out into sheets, which makes them easier to apply the alcohol ink to. So this is what they look like after one roll through. I'm not worried they're not really that conditioned at this point because they're going to get conditioned once we mix the alcohol ink into them. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to start with the turquoise. This is going to be the primary color that I'm using today because the majority of ocean stone is blue, and it just sort of has these accents of the sort of more terracotta color. So I'm going to do, oops, what is that? There we go. So I'm gonna do probably 3 of this color and then 1 of the terracotta. So I'm gonna do different intensities. Yeah. I'll do, and I like to kind of just do it as I go. So I'm gonna do this one, see how dark it turns out, and then move on to the next one. So here's the color on the first one. That's a great intensity. I don't like to mix like 100%, so you can see kind of like the lines of the colors, and there's like a little bit of variation here. That's really important when doing faux stonework, I find, just because it adds that level of like realism to it. Real stones aren't perfectly uniform, so we want there to be those little imperfections there. So for the next one, I'm going to try to make a much softer version of this color. So I'm just going to start by putting literally 1 dot and mix that. And I'm mixing these on my Atlas roller on setting 0, just because the clay isn't that conditioned yet at the starting point. Like this is quite conditioned now, but this is not. So I just find that's easier to work the color into the clay. Here's this one, a much softer blue, almost like a green, which I love. So then for the last blue one, I'm gonna try to get a color that's a mix, like a shade in between these two. So I'm gonna put just a couple dots on here. I'm not gonna do a full line like I did on that one, and hopefully it will end up somewhere in the middle, and that will blend really nicely. Part of why I like using translucent clay when I'm doing faux stone stuff is not necessarily for the sort of see-through quality. I just find it blends better than if I'm using solid clay. It just ends up looking more realistic. So I'm not too concerned about adding too much pigment so that light can't go through it anymore. That's not really the goal of why I'm using translucent clay. Yeah, they just blend really nicely together, and it creates a more realistic faux stone. So really I'm trying to mix until I lose all the white from the translucent at the edges. So this one still has a little bit here, so I'm going to keep going a little bit more. Also important to note, when you're rolling through a clay roller, you want to make sure the folded seam is always on the side and not at the top. It can be on the bottom or on the side. If it's on the top and you're rolling down like this, you're gonna get a lot of air stuck up here, and there's basically nowhere for it to go, and you could end up having air bubbles in your clay. So there we go, got rid of the white edges, and it fits perfectly between these two shades, which is exactly what I wanted. For the last piece here, I'm going to go in with the terracotta color. I'm actually gonna do 2 shades of this terracotta just to add a bit of dimension to that element. So I'm gonna cut this in half, and one of them I want it to be very saturated, and the other I'm gonna try to make it a little bit lighter because it is a strong color. Beautiful color though. So I'm gonna use the same technique I've been using and just put it back through the clay roller. So here it is after first pass. That's not pigmented enough, so I'm gonna add some more. Also, you gotta really keep an eye on your pasta roller when you're mixing with alcohol inks because it will bleed onto the roller, and you may need to clean in between colors. So because these were all blues, I didn't clean in between them because if there's a little bleed through, that's okay. But since I'm in a different color now, I did go ahead and just used sort of like a baby wipe to clean off some of that blue so that it doesn't bleed into the orange. So this is looking really good. I'm gonna leave this one here. I think I'm going to use this one as the lighter tone because it actually is quite light, which you can't see as much in this light. Yeah, you can kind of see. This one is lighter than the tone I'm going for, but I wanted to have that dimension. So this one I'm gonna try to get really pigmented, like, which can be tricky because obviously the clay absorbs a lot of the color. So even though I'm putting it on like this, obviously it's not going to be that dark and vibrant, but I'm going to try to get it as close to that as I can without adding too much pigment. The problem with adding too much pigment is not the light issue, which I mentioned earlier. I'm not worried about the translucent quality. It's just if you add too much, it can kind of cause the clay to start to get like really wet or sticky and just like hard to work with. So there is a limit on how much you can put into the clay. Okay, so here we go. I've got the final color. This is pretty much as dark as I can get it without the clay starting to get too soft. So I'm happy with that. So now we have all of our beautiful colors. The next step is to chop them up. So I like to just put them in little cubes. And just sort of chop away. I'm not really too concerned if they stick together. Like I don't want huge sections of them to stick together, but again, I'm looking for any imperfections that I can kind of add because that's going to make the final product look better. So it's okay if it's not perfect. It's actually better if it's not perfect. So I'm gonna do that to all of them, and then I'm gonna group them together. So I'm gonna keep the terracotta separate from the blues for this first step here. I'm also gonna cut up some of my white now to sort of sprinkle in. I'm gonna keep the white pieces much smaller than what we see here, just so it can just be a small sort of accent like this. That. And then I'm going to dice it up nice and small, and I'm just going to add it to the blues. Small. Again, I'm not too worried if pieces stick together. I just don't want to have any big clumps of one color. Okay, well, I'm going to sprinkle this in here. I'm going to kind of go through both of my piles and make sure I don't have any big clumps of the same color together. It's okay if there's pieces that are stuck together. Not worried about that. I just like don't want a section like this where it's all the same color. I do want them to be mixed up, or like this one down here. Yeah, that's too much. So we're gonna just separate any pieces that are kind of sticking together before we move on to the next step. Now what I'm gonna do is color both of these. So this one, top one, the blues, I'm going to use white on, and the bottom one here I'm going to use the brown chestnut on. What this does is when you cut into the cane, this is going to be a very thin line of color that separates all of these individual pieces. So that's a big part of what makes it look like a faux stone and not just sort of like, oops, a jumble of colors together. You don't need a lot, and again, the messier the better. This is where I wear a glove because alcohol ink, it stains. It will come off, but I mean, it's just sort of a pain when you're dealing with it when it's this wet, so I like to wear a glove. And if you only want to use one glove, which I like to do, just make sure you're starting with the lights and then moving to the darks, because we don't want to transfer colors at this point. Okay, so I'm just gonna mix it roughly so that everything is nicely coated here. While I wait for them to dry, I'm just gonna move them over here, and I'm going to clean up some of this alcohol ink. It does stain. You can get it off, but it's just kind of easier to clean it before it has dried. I use alcohol to get it up, and that does a really good job. I use this in a combination of baby wipes. So I just sort of employ a clean as you go method when I'm working with alcohol inks, because it just makes it easier to manage. That way I'm not scrubbing like crazy. So it just takes it right up. So I'm gonna clean that up so that when we're ready to form our cane, we have a nice clean workspace to work on. Okay, that's probably dry enough. Still a little wet, but that's okay. Now I'm just gonna take them and mix them together as best I can. I don't want them to be too thoroughly mixed here. I want there to be big sections of both colors, because that's what ocean stone looks like. So I don't want it to be an even balance. That's why we have more blue anyways. So I'm trying to just distribute it evenly in that which sense. Okay, looks good. And then I'm gonna take it and just sort of squeeze it to get it all stuck together. And then I'm gonna go in with my roller and just sort of roll the sides until I get a nice log. So you can see, like, this dries really fast. Like, I'm pressing down on it and there's like nothing coming up on my hand. So, okay, this is looking so good. This is like where the magic happens, because right now, like, I know it's gonna be so cool when I cut into it, and I'm so excited. Some people like to freeze their canes for like 5-10 minutes before they cut into them. I have done that in the past. It doesn't make that big of a difference, I find. I mean, if your colors are bleeding, then it just means you didn't let it dry enough. So here's what we got. This is our block. Something I did not know when I first started making clay logs or canes like this is that the thickness you cut them at matters. Seems obvious, but I didn't know. So the thicker you cut your pieces, the more distortion there's going to be to the pieces you cut, essentially. So if you want to maintain the pattern, you want to cut thinner pieces so that when we put them through the clay roller, they're not going to change too much. So I like to go somewhere in the middle, and that's about like this. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. So this is what we're working with. So beautiful, oh my gosh. So this is exactly how I wanted to turn out, with the bigger chunks like this and then the middle blues. So I'm gonna continue to cut this. Okay, so we're all cut up now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take them and line them up. I am going to put some effort into trying to line stone up with stone. See how it like kind of fits in there like that, so that it looks like a uniform slab. So it's kind of like a puzzle, which is fun. But don't worry too much about it. If you can't get it to line up, it's not a big deal. It just is the perfectionist in me that wants it to. See what I mean? Like, bam, beauty. There we go. So now I'm just going to take this roller and I'm going to roll it out just so the pieces all kind of come together before I put it through the clay roller. So once it seems like all the edges are joined together, then I'll go and take my big tissue blade and just sort of scrape it off of the surface here. So we're looking like this. Pretty cool. So I'm going to go through my, I'm going to run this through the clay roller at 0, just because it is on the thicker side and I don't want anything to sort of fall apart. And then I might do another pass at a smaller one. Well, I will do another pass, but it's just whether or not I fold it and do another pass. Anyways, I'm gonna put this through the clay roller at 0 to start. I'm gonna put it through this way. And this is what we have. Honestly, I love this like this. Usually I would go through and I would do another, like I would fold it in half and do another pass, but I'm gonna lose some of the details if I do that. So I think I'm gonna leave this one like this. I'm gonna cut the edges off just so it's nice and clean to work with. I do sometimes use, I do use the edges that cut off. I just, I like the clean look. Usually I use these edges that I'm cutting off. I'll put it into like cuff bracelets and stuff like that, because it's a bit of more of a mixed bag. And there we have it. How beautiful. Oh my God. So I'm gonna put it on a ceramic slab. I might have to cut this in half. This is so big. Okay, I'm gonna cut this in half to put on here. Almost in half. There, I'm gonna put it on like this. So now I'm gonna cut my shapes directly onto the surface so that I don't have to move them once they're cut. And then I will bake it directly on this tile, which I just got at like the hardware store near me. It's just a porcelain ceramic sort of high gloss tile. So the clay sticks to it really nicely. And I will bake the pieces at 265 for 30 minutes. I found that works perfectly for me. And then after they're baked, I'll finish them up and I'll show you guys the final product. So here are all of the pieces baked. It turned out so good. I used some of that scrap clay to make 2 cuffs, which I'm obsessed with. So I just wanted to show how I sand my pieces too. So I use this. I have a handheld Dremel and I have just like a buffing thing at the top, and I'll go around and do the edges, but sometimes I'll also do the surface a bit to clean them up. Like a piece like this where there's a bit of, you can kind of see like the ink spread a bit. It's really a good way to sort of just like sharpen the piece up a bit. So I'm gonna sand this one and I'll show you what I mean. This is what it looks like before. I'm gonna turn my Dremel on. I'll do the sides first. I'll just go very lightly on the top. I don't know if you can tell, but that's just a much cleaner look. And then I always check the backs too. I don't usually sand the backs, but sometimes, let me see if I can find one of the pieces that has it. If the back is like a lot, oh, here we go. If any of the backs have like the piece that was like an outside piece from the cane, so you can see here, I just go and sand that off so that it's not so foggy. It's clear too. See the difference? Okay, so I'm gonna go and sand these pieces. Okay, so I sanded all the pieces, so now I apply the resin on. I put them on this mat. It's just sort of like a silicone hexagon mat. I think it's actually like for kitchen, like a pot holder thing. I got them off Amazon. I just like cut them up so they fit in my UV light. So I'm just gonna put some of the pieces on here, and then I apply the resin. I just use toothpicks to apply the resin. I know a lot of people like to use like those silicone brushes, but I just like toothpicks better. I just feel like I have more control with them. So I'm gonna put some of the pieces on here. It's important not to overload this. I won't go all the way down. I probably usually only go halfway and do it in batches. I just find that that's just the size of my UV light. Is the stuff I use. Santa. I've used other stuff before, like JD Diction, but this is the one I prefer. I find this one doesn't pull from the edges as much, it cures faster, and it's just really high quality. So I'm gonna add some drops to each one. Then I take my toothpicks, and I use one to hold the piece in place and the other to spread it around. I pull to the edges, and then if I need to fill in the middle more, I'll go back in with the resin. But it's important to kind of make that boundary on the edges, because once you have that, if you put more resin on, it's not gonna flow over the sides. It'll kind of stay within that boundary. All right, so the resin's been applied. Before you put it under your UV light, we wanna make sure there's no bubbles. So what I use is this super cool camo lighter. So bonus points if you also have a camo lighter, but any lighter works. Mine's kind of like the blow one. You can also just use a normal one, and you're just gonna quickly, oh, is this locked? Yes, it is. There we go. You're just gonna quickly run it over, and that's gonna pop all the bubbles, just like that. And now this is ready to go in, and I just pop it in my UV light. I can't really tell you how long it takes because it seems to vary for me batch to batch. So I just kind of keep putting it in until they're nice and hard. All right, so here they are. That beautiful shine. That's what the final pieces look like. So all that's left is just to do that to the rest of them and to, you know, assemble them into jewelry. So that's my first tutorial. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you learned something. I'll be back every other week with another tutorial on something new, clay related, a lot of faux stone stuff probably. And yeah, if you have any suggestions for what you want me to do next, just drop a comment, and yeah, we'll go from there. But thanks for joining me.